My Lurky Valentine. They tell you in creative writing classes that in order to elicit an emotional response from your readers, you have to depict the emotions of your characters. That if I want you to understand my heartbreak, I have to show you some of the moments in which Ghost was lovable. But the truth is, it was all in my head from the start. Our first kiss was on a street corner when he walked me from my job at the reentry center to a class I taught at a Franciscan men's rehab center down the street. Yes, it was passionate to me. Immediately afterward, I sent him a Lana Del Rey video saying, "This is us." That's intense. I backpedaled and said, "I just want to make out in a burning car." Our first date was unremarkable, though at the time my veins were absolutely pumping glitter. We had drinks and chatted. When I invited him over at the end of the night, he declined the offer, saying he had to go home and take care of his ex girlfriend's disabled daughter. The next weekend, we took a trip to Santa Cruz, and my love buzz tried to fill the uncomfortable silences with kooky asides and self deprecating anecdotes. He told me about his abusive mother and how he had been in a jail production of The Wiz. He bragged that he'd had the most lines of all the flying monkeys. I felt so sorry for his younger self. I knew what it was like to not feel loved by my father. And he was an actor. I had also dabbled in the performative arts. Yet he seemed restless and detached, despite the bumps of coke and Molly we tooted in a hot tub overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I interpreted all of it as true love, filling in the many gaps of reality with my pure, uncut desire to be adored. After only a few weeks of dating, he ghosted me on the day I taught my first college level creative writing class. The job I had dreamed of for 20 years was completely torpedoed by the power I had foisted upon a person who hadn't even really asked for it. So naturally, I convinced myself that he must have been killed. There was no other reason someone could be so cruel. Why was I acting thirstier than a whale in the Mojave? Well, first of all, no one had ever ghosted me before, and I was in shock. It simply wasn't done. Sure, I'd had one offs where we both accepted it for what it was, but Ghost and I were in the middle of starting a relationship. The good part, too, where you bang a bunch and drink champagne. The last thing he had texted me was that he'd cover us for the weekend and that I completed him. He had used the L word. He had. First. But besides my unshakable disbelief that a man I had met in jail had rejected me, Ghost ticked all my superficial boxes. And frankly, I blame my Christian upbringing for convincing me that anytime I found a man attractive, it must be love. Besides, he was thick and tall, an anomalous white guy with a bubble ass. His frame was muscular, but not in a gym rat way. My creepy neighbor once saw us standing together on my porch and didn't leave any sex themed haikus on my windshield for a few days afterward. I envisioned him protecting me from all the creepy weirdos that are drawn to San Francisco like hippies to a bonfire. Even his jawline was strong despite his missing front teeth. He told me they had been knocked out in an assault, and as I had monologued the day we met in class, I too had been assaulted, though my scars were more psychological. Even if his teeth were actually missing from smoking meth, which I suspected, I could relate. I had certainly dabbled as a teen and only really quit because I was also a stripper at the time, and the combination of the two had a very distinct and unappealing outcome I knew I needed to avoid. Plus, even 20 years later, I still bought blow most Fridays, though the extent of the damage tended to be dance-a-thons with Marie. We were both into dopamine, tomato, tomato. Besides feeling safe and being able to relate, I felt primally drawn to him, like he was sweating fire making hormones, and my lizard brain only needed one whiff before I wanted to climb him like King Kong on the Empire State Building. When we kissed, and he was an excellent kisser, perfect amount of pressure, moisture, and movement, he'd look down at me and whisper, "Hi." His snake scaled, jail tattooed arms coiled around my waist. He was artistic and troubled, had composed large scale paintings of golden hearts ripped from their bodies, bleeding laser beams. He told me that he had been accepted into the USF School of Art on a full ride, but his father didn't secure him housing, so he didn't get to go. I had welded an 8-foot sailfish in college, my first and only sculpture that my father later took to the dump before ordering me to switch my major to English. He was funny and quick witted. Most men I've met don't know how to do bits, can't keep the ball in the air. The guy I dated before Ghost had the habit of explaining my jokes back to me. The guy before that thought pointing out my typos in text was a form of flirting. Ghost and I had at least 3 ongoing inside jokes established after our first weekend together. My favorite one was that we had lost our virginity to one another. Look, I'm not saying it was a laugh riot, just that we were on the same page. We had quickly established a level of comfort and familiarity that I often didn't ever feel around men I had known for years. He was adept at playing into the fantasies that he knew I enjoyed. I was convinced that we would save each other and use the ashes of our past to make art that would change the world. I simply had to illuminate for him that which I had only coincidentally discovered first. We were meant for one another. And so I plotted down mission to deliver the handwritten profession of undying love I had swaddled in my bra. Most people have no qualms with internet stalking their love interest. Many even take it well beyond the primary target without a second thought. I don't have a single friend who hasn't gone down a social media rabbit hole, finding out the names and exploitable flaws of all potential romantic competition, sometimes years into the liked post past. But when it comes to real life lurking, that is, when someone uninvited seeks out your residential space with the intention of convincing you to date them, your average rational person tends to draw the line. That which we unflinchingly deign to do under the cloak of online anonymity is considered desperate and pathetic when the only real difference is self acceptance and a parking space. If I asked you to imagine a typical real life lurker, you would probably picture someone unfuckable, a cis het, grown but still discernibly fetal alcohol baby dude, small head, ferrety movements, black sclera-free eyes set deep among acne-scarred biscuit-like cheeks, a yellowing heel of belly peeking out from atop his stained sweatpants. You almost certainly wouldn't picture me, a reasonably fit, gainfully employed college graduate with green eyes, blonde hair, and 34 double D breasts. You would be baffled by why I decided it was acceptable to drive my electric blue Mustang convertible to the Excelsior, parking 2 streets up the hill from Mission and hunting down the apartment of a man I had dated for only a few weeks. I cringed at my footfall resounding even louder than usual, an idiosyncratic heaviness of gait that had been remarked upon since the 3rd grade when Miss Viola gave us a homework assignment to make paper airplanes. I'd happened to have a paper airplane making kit. I asked my dad to help me, but he refused, so I spent hours making it myself. The thick cardstock provided was heavy, and I coated it with too much glue, my clumsy 8-year-old hands rendering all the angles obtuse so that the plane not only sank to the ground, but used the power of wind resistance to actually propel it down, pouting. I had even made an extra airplane for Annie, who politely declined it as her dad had helped her make one. Annie's was light and aerodynamically folded, billowing ever upward, floating on the wings of fatherly love. Since then, and of course a series of other less metaphorical incidents, I had embodied my precocious heaviness of spirit, head down, feet like rusting iron pistons on an obsolete locomotive, dragging me through the world to which I was blinded, save for the detritus that the wind had piled up between the ties. I skittered across the shadows of the few blocks I knew to be the vicinity of Ghost's apartment. I simultaneously felt ashamed for being there and hoped to run into him. My hoodie cloaked my face, tight blonde curls from rollers in which I had slept the night before peeked out strategically. My makeup was dialed up to 11. Primer, color corrector, contouring, both cream and powdered highlighter, individual false lashes glued on with tweezers and a magnifying mirror, all quivering and expectant. I checked all the doors on his block, not positive which was his, searching the face of every person I passed. I stopped at a set of stairs, pulling on the iron gate with the mailbox on the front, the one that belonged to the apartment above the nail salon he had pointed out to me once. The windows were dark and empty, no curtains, no movement. If he did live there, he was not home. It didn't seem as if anyone called that place home ever. The name on the box was not Ghost. Bualema. It sounded Samoan. I thought maybe it was the name of his landlord. I slid my letter into the slot, heard the envelope click against the bottom of the tin mailbox. Irretrievable. I wondered if I was a fool, if I should try to fish it back out. I realized that, of course, I was a fool. But isn't that what romance is? Better to put it out there than wonder what could have been if only I had been braver. I've long believed that in love, you might as well do whatever you want because if it isn't meant to be, then they won't be in your life anymore, anyways. In case you're wondering, that theory has never worked out in the past, which means it has always worked out as well. I rattled the gate once more. It held sound, my letter clinking alone in the mailbox. Like all my unanswered texts, just another shout into the void. My fate was in the hands of God, the same God that had greenlit childhood leukemia. This was definitely the right choice. Pooped and demoralized, I went to some cold and nameless bar down the street and ordered the house white wine. It had that flavor like synthetic banana candy that all shitty dive bar Chardonnays share. My phone lay next to my damp coaster, the screen as dark and empty as ghost windows. I waited for a text saying he got my letter and he was so sorry, but insert car accident, family death, improbable but still possible phone and all contact lost story here. After a second glass of warm banana wine, I finally hiked back up the hill to drive home. But I had been so lost constructing my sky castles that I hadn't checked to see where I parked initially. So I spent 20 minutes staggering up and down the steep street. I convinced myself that my car had been stolen, and by doing so, gave myself an excuse to text Ghost. I had somehow deluded myself even further, thinking that if I had a dramatic and pathetic enough event happen in my life, he would somehow finally feel emotions for me. Pity is better than apathy. I learned that at the middle school church bonfire where I lied about having been raped when I was 8. I instinctively knew that merely getting molested but actually being into it wouldn't have elicited the same level of compassion. It worked then, but not this time. He never responded, so I took an Uber home and found my car the next day. The misstep, as it were, was that I was in love with an idea, a story. I had been through so much in my life that I felt I deserved the exact version of love for which I had held out. A guy who I couldn't keep my hands off of for once. A man strong enough to carry me through the fires I seemed to be perpetually surrounded by, no matter that I lit the majority of them myself. So, yes, I lived very much in my own fantasies. We'd have a little ranch outside of Half Moon Bay, walking distance to both the redwoods and the sandstone cliffs. We'd convert the rear of the barn into an art studio. He would feed our fainting goats and miniature horses before laying into his giant painting, which he rotated according to the slant of the sun. I'd bring him coffee around 10, and we'd screw up against the canvas, his cerulean-stained fingers lifting me onto the easel shelf, leaving coy shadows in my armpits. Then laughing in the shower, scrubbing one another, him giving me an affable warning look as I tried to clean his butt crack. He once told me that he had a special aversion to butt stuff since jail. And that would be how we pushed each other's boundaries. Playfully, checking in with our eyes, reassuring one another we meant no harm. That's a healthy thing to want, right? So what if I was pushy about getting it? I was leaning in. But of course, he did not respond to the letter. I canceled the Valentine's Day reservations I had made at my favorite Indian restaurant. And I did what all broken-hearted people who should be working on themselves but feel so empty they can't handle it do on Valentine's Day. I went on a Bumble date. David was a nice enough guy, kinda dorky, not funny, not artistic, eyes that bulged a smidge too much, fraggly, thyroidy. We ate Thai, single style. He had a gluten allergy. He said he found online dating difficult, not a lot of callbacks. I said, "That's weird. You seem great to me." I was trying to fantasize about him, us, just a couple of healthy people who didn't make one another's hearts ache like they were being pulled on giant hooks across the surface of an alligator pond. He seemed hopeful, and I wanted to give him that, knowing that I had no intention of seeing him again. I drank 3 glasses of happy hour wine, but alcohol only made ghost memories more slippery, more difficult to subdue. The time we watched the sunset on Gray Whale Beach, or the time we banged while he grilled me on the socioeconomic discourse implicit in the zombie horror genre. David showed me his electric bike. I decided I wanted one too. He said he would sell me his for cheap. I laughed and thought, maybe, but I don't want to have to fuck him for a discount. We kissed as we parted ways. I went dancing at DNA Lounge where 18-year-old girls roamed around in thongs, and I wanted to wrap them in quilts and tell them they deserved both love and warm heinies. I made out with another guy who bored me, then headed home alone. Around midnight, Ghost texted, "Happy Valentine's Day. I miss you." "I miss you too. Are you coming over?" "Yes." I waited for an hour. He didn't text anymore or respond to mine, so my drunk ass took an Uber to his apartment. I happened to arrive just as another person did. I think they let me in by mistake. There were about 5 people inside, most of them sort of wandering from room to room. No one spoke to me, and the aura in the place was that everyone was very confused by my presence, as was I, because I had somehow forgotten that some people live in trap houses. I had never been in a trap house before. It wasn't fully trappy. There were no mattresses on the floor or needles strewn about. As far as I could see, there were no dead babies crawling on the ceiling, but it was quite dim inside, so I can't vouch for that. It was mostly just really cluttered with objects and people, unlike my house, where my roommates and I all sort of sequestered ourselves in our rooms. I was a bit jealous of this apparent friendship, as it had been 2 years since I had been truly friends with a roommate. Except the activity that these people all seemed to have in common was smoking meth. Every single person there had their own pipe and was tooting on it consistently. It appeared to be some sort of reward system, and that they were rewarding themselves for things like going into the kitchen to lean on the counter or changing the channel during a commercial. One of the wanderers was a lanky black man wearing a raccoon cap. This was not of the Davy Crockett variety with a thick, bushy tail that seemed to imply the wearer had bested a virile beast. No, this hat was flat, the fur balding, the tail short and nubbed. To my drunk ass, it was reanimated roadkill, floating from room to room, rearranging its hoard of pilfer DVD players. I knew I needed to leave, so I sat down to collect myself and call another Uber. I was also admittedly intrigued, finally seeing the world that Ghost had gone to great lengths to hide from me, and the hints of which I had ignored because they did not fit in with my fantasies. I recalled the day of our first date when he texted, "What are you doing?" "Working? You?" "Chilling at my friend's place." "Don't do drugs. I heard you have a date tonight." "I don't do drugs." "You heard?" I had tingled at this. He was already better at flirting than anyone else I had met in years, and he didn't do drugs. I envisioned the cozy tent we would share in Yosemite. 2 healed people slow banging as the season's first snow began to fall. The only person in the apartment who didn't move was a mud castle of a woman who sat on a couch across from a gigantic television. Ghost had told me that he lived platonically with his ex, Fancy. But her glare and the men's reluctance to join us in the living room informed me that I was the only person who had been made aware of their adapted relationship status. He had told me a bit about her, that he let her stay because he loved and cared for her disabled daughter, who he took to doctor's appointments because he was just that nice of a guy. Oh, and of course, Fancy was a psycho, but all of Ghost Exes were crazy, naturally. The fuming monarch sat planted in place, moving only to lift the remote or hit her meth pipe. Her voice seemed to have been distilled from a bushel of menthol smoking 40-year-old Queen's grandmothers. She barked various orders at the men in the room, who nodded and followed them like flying monkeys. One order was to not let me leave. I was too tipsy to be deeply frightened, but I did notice my spine stiffen, my ass cheeks pinching the upholstery of the armchair in which I sat, my normally leaden feet arching, pushing me back away from her, possibly all the way down the stairs to the street. Who the fuck is you? I'm Ghost girlfriend? Oh, you the one who put the letter? Yeah, I didn't realize. No, you didn't. I just wanted to talk to him. Oh, you gonna talk to him. His ass is coming home right now. He gonna explain all this shit. Oh, good. You gonna take him with you? Yeah, sure, if that's okay with you. Oh yeah, he gonna go live with you. I'm sick of his bullshit. Okay, cool. Yeah. The frostbite of realization descended. She was the Fualema from the mail slot. She was the reason he had disappeared. And though her words conveyed that I had won, I was also slowly beginning to accept that I was a fucking idiot. I groaned, cradling my hot, wincing face in my hand, recalling the times he'd had me pick him up on the corner. How stupid I had been for assuming it was because he was just really considerate, didn't want to make me have to look for parking. I was baffled by how this woman, who had the personality of a Mack truck exhaust pipe, could wield any power in a world where I had only gained mine by being sweet and submissive. Frankly, I envied her confidence. And of course, I envied Ghost's loyalty to her. When he had disappeared, I asked Shard, who had also been recently released and was easy to find on Facebook, why he would do that to me. And Shard said he only liked chicks who didn't like him. And this moment seemed to prove the theory. I realized then that his mother must have been quite a vicious cunt. But I also gathered my resolve around me. We all had childhood trauma, but true love was the falling away of all that pain. It was taking the risk to set aside negative behavior patterns in pursuit of the greatest power of all. It did not occur to me that not everyone saw love this way. Fancy hit her pipe with a sparkling ruby butane torch, then raised the volume on what appeared to be a New Age spirituality documentary. On screen, a blonde white lady in gossamer robes floated through a meadow, squeezing flower petals into the stream beside her, purring about how connected she felt to the earth goddess. I asked, does this feel ironic to you? Watching this while you smoke? Uh, no, why? Oh, no reason. I should go. You're not going nowhere. Ghost is coming home for you right now. She screamed into her phone. Hey, motherfucker, there's a lady here saying she loved you. She said you could go live with her. Get your ass home and pack your shit. She paused to bellow a meth cloud, a tornado gathering on the ceiling above her. She turned to me, the phone held in my direction. You love him, right? He could live with you, right? All I could do was nod and say, I'm sorry. I should go. I said you're not going nowhere. Not till your boyfriend comes home. My boyfriend? I couldn't believe she was just giving him to me like that. My fantasies, my fuck barn, all of the beach sunsets. She scared me, and yet she was being fairly nice. Maybe she just had a resting bitch voice. Hell, I'd known plenty of people in New York who were rough at first. She was giving me Ghost, my soulmate. I had misjudged her. Oh Lord, please cure me of my biases. Ghost didn't come home for another hour. Fancy and I watched a documentary about Ram Dass. I was sobering up enough that the implicit danger of the situation was beginning to truly blossom out from my gut, scratching at my skin from underneath. Every time I said I should go, she said no, he'd be there soon. I could hear the roadkill raccoon foraging in the rooms behind us. I followed his movements, the flash of butane blast where his little raccoon fingers would normally grasp a crabapple or an injured bowl. As fear and shame replaced the alcohol in my bloodstream, I began to crave anything that might renumb me. I decided I wanted some of his magic crystals. I stood, wobbled, mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom, then saw the little stumpy striped tail turn the corner into a bedroom. It looked like a room you'd see on Hoarders or amateur cream pie porn. The walls stacked high with loose electronics, their cords coiled together, plug prongs like bared fangs. I recognized ghost paintings of hearts beating out laser beams stacked against the wall, leering from behind a pile of stolen Air Jordans. I asked the wily beast if I could hit his pookie, a term I'd heard them using in the shadows, and which my inner writer nabbed and added to my toolbox of slang I'd never personally used but knew would add credibility to my later retelling. I fished a $5 bill from my purse. I wanted to make the floor stop spinning, wanted to prove I belonged, or at least that I was cool adjacent. I wanted to ingest a modicum of confidence so that when Ghost finally arrived, I could potentially convince him that my presence wasn't so much creepy as bold. I wanted to become the meth smoke itself, to expand and fill up the room. In so doing, I could make amends with Fancy by filling her lungs with crystallized power. To the guys who cowered in the shadows, I could be their consolation prize for an otherwise miserable existence. To Ghost, I could finally be something that he loved, the thing that explained why he would choose this life over me. The thing whose allure I could at least comprehend, unlike Fancy's, unlike him simply not being that into me. I could be in essence these people wanted, as opposed to the reality that I was a delusional interloper, a lurker. Then, after they exhaled me, I'd float out the window and over the 280 freeway, over the streak of red on the off ramp where the raccoon had met its demise, toward the beach, toward safety. I'd shower down like moonlight through my own window into the tranquility of my room. And finally, I'd reform, a little white, emotionless crystal nestled on my pillow, absolved. I held the glass pipe to my lips. The rascal lit it for me. Charred smoke prickled my veins. I shattered like one of those sliced up bodies they cart from town to town to show how we look inside. I couldn't believe that anyone would feel this way on purpose. I jangled my way back to my chair, ears ringing, shell shocked. Each moment of waiting, another layer of skin tried to detach and scurry down the stairs. Finally, Ghost opened the front door. Fancy greeted him by screaming, "This lady here loves you and wants you to go home with her. Is that what you're gonna do, Ghostifer?" Whoa. She used his full name. I knew that if that was what he was into, I could never compete with this evil surrogate mother. But the elation I felt from finally seeing him again eclipsed all rational thought. I tried not to look too eager, but meth is like ground up jumping beans in your craw. And besides, had I not done all of those stupid things just for this moment? I stared into my clasped hands, felt him pass behind me and enter the kitchen. The first I saw of him was just his broad back, the thick muscles of his shoulders hunching up, faced away from me, hitting the pookie. I could tell by how he handled the torch, the way he took his hit so fast, the precision of the act, that this was who he was. "You hear me, motherfucker? This lady here say you could live with her, so I guess you should do that. She was nice, actually." She seemed relatively calm. Heck, I was. I was nice. I was so glad she was seeing the light. Ghost made sense with me, the nice lady, not you, the horror show. Wow, she was pretty cool, actually. Men always exaggerate their exes being crazy. Uh, can I just talk to him outside for a minute? Yeah, go ahead. Then he can move in with you. We walked down the stairs and stood on the sidewalk under the window. The words spun out of my mouth, a jumble of how I never felt this way before and that I think it would be a good move considering. when a heavy votive candle exploded at our feet. Glass shards needled my ankles, freezing into a shattered halo the size of my head. Ghost pulled me to the side, away from the window, and I looked up into his eyes and asked, "Are you done with me?" He said, "No," then turned as Fancy roared above, followed by the crack of the frame of one of his heart paintings. I called an Uber and scrambled in. I assumed he was coming with me, Fancy's screeches still blasting out of the window. Then the apartment door slammed against the stucco wall. Sharp wooden thwacks tumbled their way to the gate. Fancy thrust a baseball bat through the metal bars, barking and smashing at the mailbox. The Uber driver said, "Miss, we need to go." I pleaded, "Ghost, please, let's go." Unlooking, he waved me away. "Ghost, come on." He waved me away again. "Ghost, come home with me, please." He waved me away a third time, not looking, dodging the bat as Fancy stabbed it at his face. "Miss, this isn't safe," the Uber driver said. I closed my door. I looked back through the rear windshield as we pulled away. Ghost was there, pressing his chest against the gate, the mailbox digging into his sternum as he tried to get back in to her.